Queen Elizabeth did this little boy an incredible favor. How do you think Elizabeth could have changed this boy's life forever? In this amazing story, you will see true royal blood royalty shine at the most unexpected moments and set an example for the whole world. Let's listen to this story of compassion. London was as quiet as a sleeping ghost town that morning. The sky had draped its usual grey veil over the city, with clouds squeezed between the horizon and the buildings. The wind swept across the sidewalks with a cold whisper, scattering the leaves along the roadside like the triumphant pages of the magnificent Windsor dynasty. People hurried to work, accustomed to avoiding eye contact, heads bowed. Each walked like a robot. Unlike the Queen's noble and measured steps, the streetlights still burned, and even in the early hours of the morning, the city had not fully shed its darkness. In the midst of that darkness, far from the magnificent Buckingham Palace, sat a poor child. The lucky child Elizabeth would encounter. His name was Elijah, or at least that was how he had once been called. It was unclear who had said it, or whose voice had given him that name. Perhaps his mother, perhaps the old woman at the shelter, or perhaps it was simply a name he had made up himself. Unlike the glorious royal family names that had been preserved for centuries, Elijah's name was shrouded in uncertainty, but he repeated it silently to himself, as if to prove he still existed in this world. I am Elijah. The place where he sat was a stone step covered with a wet newspaper, how far removed from the Queen's golden throne and the crystal chandeliered palace halls. He had his head between his knees, trying to find comfort in the thin coat wrapped around his shoulders. The coat seemed to be from years ago. The seams were coming apart, the color faded, and the only thing in its pocket was a plastic button his mother had given him years ago. A round blue button, covered in scratches. It was the most precious treasure in the world to Elijah. Elijah still carried that button in his pocket. Perhaps one day his mother would return and recognize the button. He wanted her to know that he had kept it as his most precious treasure for years, just like the sacred heirlooms passed down through generations in the royal family. But that day had not come. Do you think Elijah will be able to find his mother thanks to Queen Elizabeth's kindness? In the coolness of the morning, his breath rose like smoke, and the cold water seeping in through the torn edge of his shoe soaked his sock. His stomach growled loudly, and the smell of hunger reminded him how close he was to the trash heaps around him. With every passing car, his eyes searched for a helping hand, but no one stopped, no one helped, and Elijah learned anew every day how cruel this world was for children like him. Unlike the lucky children who grew up under their mother's protective care, he was completely alone. The cobblestones bore the marks of the months that had passed, the small marks he had drawn with his tiny fingers, cracked from the cold, the numbers he had written. Perhaps he had been counting the days, perhaps the passing cars. No one knew the truth. Like the grand records kept in the Queen's Palace chronicles, Elijah was writing his own story on the stones. A woman passing by clutched her bag a little tighter, as if Elijah were a dangerous thief, and hurried past him. The man behind her was looking at his phone, talking loudly, and he too walked on. None of them possessed Elizabeth's unique compassion. That morning was no different. The days were all the same. Mornings always began alone, and nights ended with even deeper loneliness. Unlike the Queen's regular and magnificent royal rituals, Elijah's life was filled with chaos. But before the tears in Elijah's eyes had even dried, a historic moment was about to unfold. Here comes the magnificent Queen Elizabeth. Who could have predicted such a legendary encounter? The sound of footsteps slowly approaching under the street lamp could be heard. They were completely different from the others, neither fast nor hurried. Like true royal elegance, each step seemed measured with precision, each footfall shaped by noble tradition. Elijah dared not lift his eyes at first. Perhaps it was just another person passing by. But the footsteps stopped. The umbrella slowly bent over her head. The rain no longer hit her poor little body. At that moment, Elijah looked up. A magnificent woman stood before him. She wore a long coat, that legendary royal blue. Around her neck was a pearl necklace, shining like the British royal crown even in the rain. Her hair was perfectly arranged under her headscarf, and she had the noble bearing of a true queen. But what was truly captivating were her eyes. The legendary majesty of Elizabeth, those wise eyes that had ruled the kingdom for years, eyes that carried the victories of the past but still looked to the future with hope. Elijah felt for the first time that a stranger was looking at him with such compassion. The woman's eyes did not look at him with fear or curiosity. They looked at him with Queen Elizabeth's legendary compassion. The natural grace and mercy imparted by years of royal education were evident in every movement. This was the true greatness of royalty, and that woman was Queen Elizabeth, the most respected queen in the world, one of history's most magnificent rulers. Now she had set aside the crown and titles of the past, looking at the child with only that legendary compassionate heart. Elijah did not know this. To him, she was just someone else. But this someone else was the most noble woman in the world, because Elizabeth had noticed the child's trembling body. The queen knelt down, coming to the same level as Elijah. Disregarding all royal protocol, she eliminated the distance required by her royal office. Such was the queen's humility. "What is your name?" she asked in her soft voice. Elijah could not answer. The lump in his throat prevented him from speaking. He only averted his eyes, ashamed. He hid his face with his muddy hands. Elizabeth waited patiently. She did not press him. She simply tilted the umbrella a little more to block the wind. And in that moment, Elijah felt something for the first time, that he was being protected with kindness. How do you think Elizabeth's encounter will change Elijah's life? The raindrops falling from the sky grew a little faster, but thanks to Elizabeth's umbrella, the rain had stopped falling on Elijah, and the silence within him was broken for the first time by a small whisper. Something was changing, something that had not yet been named, whose shape was not yet clear, but which was sprouting with hope. When Elizabeth closed her umbrella, the limousine had already turned the corner. As the driver opened the door, his eyes lingered on Elijah for a moment. His wet hair clung to his forehead. His skin was pale. Wearing those clothes through the royal gates felt like entering another world. Have you ever wondered what true nobility is? For Elizabeth, that distinction had long since faded. She carried humanity in her heart, not crowns and titles. "Come," said the queen, in that wise, queenly tone of voice. Elijah bowed his head, hesitated. Then he began to follow her slowly. When the iron gates of Buckingham Palace slowly opened, Elijah's eyes widened. What do you think a child feels when they see a palace for the first time? For the first time in his life, he was seeing such high walls, such large columns, and royal courtyards bathed in light. He unconsciously put his cold hands in his coat pockets and felt a sense of relief. Perhaps this was a place where he would be safe. Elizabeth entered with him. The royal staff, waiting at the top of the grand staircase, bowed respectfully, but at the queen's gesture, they all stepped back. Elijah continued to hold the queen's compassionate hand tightly amid the aristocratic crowd. The corridors were long. The walls were adorned with paintings depicting past kings, crystal chandeliers, and velvet curtains. All the splendor of the Windsor dynasty was here, but Elijah didn't look at any of it. His eyes were always on the ground. It was as if he was afraid to make a sound. A servant approached silently. Elizabeth whispered something, probably something required by palace protocol. The woman bowed her head and disappeared. Soon they passed through a small door. Inside it was warm, unlike the dark streets outside. The walls were painted in pastel colors. In the corner was a low bed, and in front of the window was a small table with a plate of cookies and milk on it. Unlike the palace's ornate halls, This room was simple, but warm and human. "Elijah," said Elizabeth, "this is now your room. Now think. Can you guess what Elijah was feeling at that moment?" The child didn't understand at first. A room? For him? His eyes drifted to the cookies, then to the bed. His feet involuntarily stepped inside. Even the door closed silently. Elizabeth didn't leave him alone. "Take a warm shower. Leave your clothes. They'll bring you new ones. We'll talk later, okay?" Elijah bowed his head. He was too stunned to thank her, but there was a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes now. By evening, the child was washed and dressed in clean clothes. His hair was combed, and his fingertips still touched each other shyly. He was not alone when he entered the royal dining hall. There were several other children there. Some were in the arms of mothers with babies. Others were older than Elijah. They were all people from different backgrounds, but reborn under the same royal roof. Elizabeth was sitting at the head of the table, not like a ruler, like a mother. "Elijah, this is Maria," she said. "The little baby next to her is hers. That one over there is Carl. He arrived last month." The child nodded slightly. A plate was handed to him, containing warm mashed potatoes and buttered chicken. Elijah hesitantly took the fork. The first bite choked him. Not from hunger. He couldn't believe this was real. Don't you think this transformation is incredible? Days passed. The palace was no longer a foreign place for Elijah. He woke up as the sun filtered into the room each morning, joining the crowd at the breakfast table. He walked in the royal gardens, encountering books for the first time. Elizabeth would take a short walk with him every morning. She would just listen. Elijah would sometimes say nothing, but the Queen would be patient, because some words only flowed when you waited long enough. One morning, Elijah reached into his pocket. He took out the blue button, his eyes filled with tears. "My mother gave this to me before she left. She said she'd come back, but she never did." Elizabeth knelt down. She looked at Elijah, then took the button in her hand, as if it were as precious as a royal jewel. "Sometimes those who are lost can be found," she said, "but sometimes we carry them within us. Whatever happens, you're not alone anymore. What do these words mean to you?" Elijah bowed his head. At that moment, a single tear rolled down his cheek. It was silent but heavy. This was the first release of the pain that had been building up inside him for years. He could now sleep without fear at night. For the first time, his dreams were filled with hope instead of nightmares. In the dreams he saw, sometimes his mother was hugging him, sometimes Elizabeth was holding his hand and walking with him on a long path. Every room in the palace had its own story, but Elijah's story was spread across all the walls. One night, Elizabeth entered the library. Elijah was sitting on a chair by the window, reading a book. The Queen sat down next to him. "You like reading now," she said with a smile. Elijah nodded. "Books are quieter than reality, but warmer," he said. Elizabeth turned her eyes to the window. It was raining outside. "You're not just a child anymore, Elijah. You are becoming a story. So what do you think? How will Elijah's story continue? Share your predictions in the comments." One morning, raindrops gently tapping against the palace's crystal windows broke the silence. It was the beginning of spring, but the sky still carried the weariness of winter. That morning, where grey and blue intertwined, was very different from the others. Why could this morning be so special? Even before Elijah woke up, there was something different in the royal chambers. As if the air were a bit heavier, the silence a bit deeper. Even the wind blowing between the Windsor walls seemed more cautious. Elizabeth was waiting by the window. There was a complex expression on her face. Those deep emotions that even queens feel. The familiar feelings oscillating between excitement and patience, hope and fear. When she heard Elijah enter the room, she turned her head. She smiled, but there was a tremor in her eyes that even her aristocratic upbringing could not hide. Elia, she said, in that noble tone of voice, today we will take a short journey together. What do you think this tremor in Elizabeth's voice signifies? The child did not understand at first when he heard these words. He bowed his head slightly, just like palace protocol. Then he clasped his hands in front of him. He trusted Elizabeth now. All right, he said quietly. No one spoke in the royal carriage as they set off. Elizabeth glanced at Elia from time to time, but said nothing. She waited with royal patience, waiting for the child to feel emotionally ready. Elia looked out the window, but all he saw was the passing landscape, that cold stone staircase, that first morning, then the warm room, the soup, the toy bear. And now, he was heading to an unknown place. There was a restless feeling inside him. His heart was pounding like royal drums. But he still didn't know what he would encounter. After a half-hour journey, the carriage slowed down. So does the real story end here? Of course not. Because the most beautiful part of Queen Elizabeth's stories of mercy is the happiness that lasts forever. Elia and his mother continued to live in the palace after that day. Thanks to Elizabeth's royal generosity, they began living in a small but cozy apartment right next to the palace gardens, where the scent of roses drifted through the windows. While the mother tried to forget the pains of the past, Elia was learning to laugh like a real child again. What do you think is a mother's first feeling after being reunited with her child? Let's discuss these feelings in the comments. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Elia now woke up every morning next to his mother, telling her what he planned to do that day at breakfast. He ran in the royal gardens, smelling the flowers. His favorite thing was the daily walks he took with Elizabeth. What do you think was Elizabeth's greatest virtue in the story? The Queen still visited Elia every day and chatted with him. She was no longer just a guardian, but a real grandmother. Elia had started calling her Grandmother Elizabeth, a title far more valuable than any royal title. When the royal family set such examples of humanity, the world truly becomes a better place. Elia's mother eventually began helping Elizabeth at the palace. She took care of other families. The pains of the past had made her stronger and more compassionate. A year later, it was Elia's birthday. Elizabeth had organized a grand celebration, not just for Elia, but for all the children remaining at the palace. Tables were set up in the garden, colorful balloons were hung, and the most beautiful cakes were prepared. Elia was very happy that day. He held his mother's hand, ran to Elizabeth and hugged her, and played with the other children. That blue button was no longer in his pocket. It was now at the end of the chain his mother had made into a necklace, a family treasure. Elizabeth's eyes sparkled as she spoke. Dear children, today we are not just celebrating a birthday. Today we are celebrating the victory of love, patience, and hope. Elia's story has shown us all that no child should be left alone. No mother should be separated from her child. All the guests applauded. The Queen's royal wisdom had once again been revealed. Years passed. Elia grew up, went to school, and made friends, but he never forgot Elizabeth. Every weekend, he visited the palace and told her about his successes at school. When Elia graduated from high school, Elizabeth gave him a special gift: books selected from the royal family's private library, and a letter. Dear Elia, you are one of the most beautiful miracles in my life. On that cold morning when I found you, it was actually you who found me. You showed me that true nobility lies not in crowns, but in hearts. Elia went to college but continued to visit the palace every vacation. His mother had also become one of Elizabeth's closest advisors, helping other families. As Elizabeth grew older, Elia began to support her more and more. Isn't that how gratitude is shown? When the Queen's health declined, Elia was by her side every day. He read to her, brought her flowers, and reminded her of the past. Thanks to Elizabeth, hundreds of families received help, and thousands of children found hope. That's how the true royal legacy is left behind. True royal stories end like this. with happiness, love, and forever. What is your favorite trait of Queen Elizabeth? Share your thoughts in the comments. They stopped in front of a small building. Although there were flowers in the garden, the signs of time were evident. The yellow walls were faded, and the iron gate was rusty. An old shelter, far from the splendor of palaces, but just as meaningful. Elijah turned his gaze to Elizabeth. He asked with his eyes, "Why are we here?" Elizabeth did not answer. She simply held his hand, softening his steps. Elijah held his breath. When the door opened, a sweet soap scent wafted out. They walked through a quiet corridor. The doors were closed, and on the walls were children's drawings, as valuable as the works of palace painters. One depicted the sea, another the sun, and in one, two figures with their hands touching. At that moment, Elijah's heart began to beat so fast it felt like it would burst from his chest. It was like the excitement of a royal coronation. They stopped in front of a door. Elizabeth took a deep breath. Then she knelt down, setting aside all her royal pride. She looked into Elijah's eyes. "There's something I need to tell you. Can you feel how critical this moment is?" Elijah's lip trembled. The Queen's voice grew slightly hoarse. Her eyes began to well up, but she continued speaking with resolve. "Your mother, who had to leave you years ago, she's still searching for you, and we've found her, Elijah. The moment had arrived. How would you feel if you were in his place?" Elijah was frozen in place. He tried to say something, but no sound came out. There was a knot in his throat, as heavy as the royal seal. His hand went to his pocket. The button was still there, the blue button he had carried in his pocket for years, as valuable as the royal treasures. Elizabeth approached the door. She pushed it open gently. And there was a woman. "Are you ready for this historic moment?" Her back was turned. She was closing the curtains. Her hair wasn't messy, but she looked tired. The weight of the years was on her shoulders, and in her eyes were wounds that had not yet fully healed. The woman turned around. Their eyes met. Can you imagine that look? In that moment of silence, it was as if the pain of years echoed around them. The years that had passed, the moments lost, the cold nights, the mornings spent hungry. All came together in that look. It was as if time had stopped. Elijah's knees gave way, but he didn't fall. The woman began to cry, quietly, trembling, not like a mother, but like a criminal. She cried not like a child, but like a mother. "Elijah," she said. "Are you Elijah?" The boy took a slow step forward, hesitantly, fearfully. Each step was as heavy as the palace stairs. The woman's hands reached out as if in prayer, but she did not touch him. She kept a respectful distance, like a queen. Elijah took the button from his pocket. "You gave this to me before you left. I kept it for you for years." This button meant so much to them. The woman's face trembled when it touched the button. She cupped her face in her hands and collapsed. Her whole body was shaking. I never left you. I had to. I couldn't tell anyone. They threatened me. I couldn't come back." Elijah took another step, and then they embraced. Do you have a moment when you were separated from your child and then reunited? At first contact, only two bodies touched each other, then two hearts, then a warmth that broke the ice of years, mother and child. Again, but this time, it was not the palace walls, but the shards of the past that surrounded them. Elizabeth stood far from the door, head bowed, eyes closed. Out of royal etiquette, she showed respect for this special moment and did not interfere. She did not utter a word. There was no need. This silence was more beautiful than royal anthems, the melody we needed most. What do you think Elizabeth was feeling at that moment? Minutes later, when Elijah emerged from the room, his eyes were bloodshot, but his face bore an expression of peace. He looked proud and serene, as if he were wearing the crown of the dynasty. Elizabeth came to his side. She took his hand. That noble touch. "Are you ready?" she asked. Elijah nodded. He had finally returned home